All right, so welcome to this short video. I'm going to present to you some pseudocode that should help you along the path of completing this project. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of walk through what we have here already and discuss what we're going to be putting in each of these locations. So I'm not going to give you the specific code, but I'm going to do pseudocode. So we'll talk through it and I'll put in some comments, and that should help to kind of narrow down what's happening here. So up here, the first things you're going to have to do here is insert some information into here so that they can grab the correct ID. All right, so to do that, we're just going to, it's going to type in there. All right, so we'll do it outside of here. And what we're going to do here is just kind of come in here and let you know to look at the pennies.html code for correct IDs. All right, and that's really what you're doing here for each of these. It should be pretty self-explanatory, right? Which ID am I looking for to put into the pieces variable? You should be able to figure that out. All right, so down here we see that intro. Remember that because we're usually using this with the .inner HTML, if I put HTML into a string, once this intro gets added to info's inner HTML on the HTML document, it's going to treat this tag as an H3 tag, creating the 23 pennies header. So you can create HTML code and insert that into your web page using the .inner HTML. All right, so then down here we have display pennies method being called because I want the pennies to be displayed right away, right? Once this page loads, I want to see how many pennies there are. So I went ahead and called that display pennies method right here so that when the page is loaded, I see how many pennies there are, and it makes the board look proper. But yours isn't showing any pennies because the function doesn't have anything in here. So what we're going to do here is we are going to add some HTML. So kind of like what we did up here with let intro equal, and then we put some HTML here. You're going to do something very similar to that. You're going to create a variable, let's say a penny, and you're going to add a div with a class penny. If we look over here at the styles CSS, you see here's the penny class. All right, it has a height of 25, a width of 25, a black border, a color that looks like a penny brown, and a border radius of 100%. So that's going to produce a circle that is this color. That's going to represent the pennies. So anything that I create that has the size pen or that has the class penny is going to be created. All right. So over here, what are we going to do here? We're going to, let's go ahead and put my and that's kind of annoying, but let's say let's create a variable to hold HTML div with the class penny. So once you've created that variable, right, then we're going to create a for loop. Let's just do this. Let's single line it. So now create a for loop that will create the correct number of pennies based on this variable right here, number of pennies. That's how many pennies it should create. So remember, make it a variable, use the variable in the for loop so that it's dynamic. When the number of pennies changes, it doesn't produce as many pennies. So we saw how to add, right? This should give you some good help into this for loop will create the correct number of pennies by adding, and of course this is the one I need multiple lines on. So make it a little bit easier for you by adding a new div for each penny. All right. So once you're done with that, that's pretty much going to take care of displaying pennies. But you might notice that when you do this, it's just if there were already pennies there, when this display pennies function gets called again, those pennies are going to get added on to the new pennies, or the new pennies will be added on to whatever pennies were already there. So you want to be careful. Whenever you call this display pennies, you want to clear out the pieces. So in here, right, you see this pieces, this hashtag pieces. This is a section of the HTML. That is where this div, this is where all the pennies are going to be displayed. They're going to be inside of this pieces. That's where they should be, right? Correct number of pennies by adding a new penny into the pieces section for each penny. All right. So before you can do that, though, you need to clear out all of the old pennies. All right. So first, clear the pennies in the pieces section. All right. So that kind of lays out what you should be doing here with the display pennies. Clear out the old pennies, create a variable to hold a div with the class penny. That variable can then be added to the pieces section in a for loop the correct number of times. That's the display pennies function. Those are the things you need to do. So down here, let's talk about the take, right? The take method is really the user's turn, all right? We're going to put our code in here, but let's think about what we need to do here. When we take our turn, we're going to be clicking. Let's go over here and look at pennies. You see here that there are 3 buttons. There's the 1, the 2, and the 3. 1 penny, 2 pennies, 3 pennies. If I click the 1 penny, I call the take method with a 1 as a parameter argument. If I click the 2 pennies, it calls the take method with a 2 as a parameter. And if I click 3 pennies, you get the idea. So whichever button I click on, the take method is being called, just with a different number as the argument. So when I come back over here, this number is either going to be a 1, a 2, or a 3. That number is going to indicate how many pennies should be taken from the number of pennies, which starts off at 23. So the first thing you want to do, though, is think about, wait a minute, am I trying to take too many pennies? In the beginning, this isn't going to matter too much because there's 23, but at the end, it's going to matter, right? What happens if I try to take 3 pennies, but there's only 1 penny? Or there's trying to take 3 pennies, but there's only 2 pennies? So the first thing you want to do is check. All right. So check if num is too large compared to number of pennies. All right. So if num is too large, right, then you need to tell. And I'm going to put this inside of here because this should be nested. This is a condition. So what should happen? You should, notify the user there isn't enough, or invalid choice, something like that. Then return. Return will end the method. So if they try to take too many pennies, we just stop right here. We don't do anything else with the function. It just stops. It's not going to end the game. It's just going to tell them you can't do that. And then it's still going to be the user's turn. Because if it returns at this point, the computer's turn never gets called. Because if I'm returning here, here's where I call the computer turn. This is how the computer gets to take their turn, is because this method knows that I've finished. If I finish, then the computer takes their turn. If I hit a return here, my turn never ends. All right, so it should work out that way. All right, so check to make sure they're not trying to take too many pennies. And then when you're done with that, you need to check if you win or lost by taking the last penny. So if you take the last penny, then what's going to be true? This number is going to be equal to the number of pennies. If that's true, then you need to notify the user they took the penny and they lost. Make sure you change the number of pennies as appropriate and display pennies again. Last return. All right, because again, if I just lost, does it make any sense for the computer to take their turn? No, I just lost. The computer can't take their turn. The game's over. All right. So, and the way we set up this computer turn, they would never be able to take their turn. It would just be an infinite loop because there's 0 pennies left and they're picking 1, 2, or 3. You should be checking if they're taking too many pennies. They should keep trying so they are not taking too many pennies. And if there's 0 pennies and they're picking 1, 2, 3, it's always going to be too many. So we hit a return here, and this ends the game, right? And this return slightly differently, because this return, nobody's going to be able to move anymore because there's 0 pennies left. So, and you're going to give them a notice that the game's over anyway. All right. So there's the function, the take function. All right. So but it's not completely over yet. So we check if the number is too large of available pennies. We check if I took the last penny. If none of those things are true, right? I'm not trying to take too many, and I haven't taken the last one, well then it must be a legitimate turn. If it's a legitimate turn, adjust the number of pennies that are left, right? Provide feedback. To the user, letting them know how many were selected. Then, right, we want to display the pennies again because because the number of pennies have changed. My display needs to change to accommodate that. So we want to change the pennies. All right. So again, now you're starting to see why this display pennies, you have to first clear the pennies in the piece section, because this display pennies has already been called in a number of different situations. We don't want them adding more pennies on. We want to clear it, put the right number of pennies on, and then move on. So that is your take function in pseudocode, what I want you to try to do using code. Okay, so moving along here to the computer's turn now. Now, the computer's turn, up here, when the user made a turn, we gave it a number, right? And that was determined by which button was pushed. That number depends on which button I push. Here, the computer is going to need a number as well, but it's not going to be a parameter or argument. So I'm going to create a number to use. All right, you don't have to give it a value. We're going to get to that, but create a variable. And we'll do that variable to store a number. All right, simple. All right, now what we want to do is we want to generate a random number, right? We want to generate a random number. So generate between, well, what numbers we want? 1, 2, or 3. Those are the numbers we want. 1, 2, or 3. So you should be able to do that. All right. Now, this generating random numbers 1, 2, or 3, again, we kind of have to go back to this situation where, what if I only have one piece left and the computer randomly generates a 3? Well, then that's going to cause problems because it can't take 3 pennies if there's only 1 penny. So once I've generated my random number, I need to check, right? If the number is good, then I can stop generating numbers. If the number is too big, then I need to keep generating numbers. So you see what's happening here is this generating random number should be a loop. It should be looping, all right? Let me put some until the number is appropriate. All right, based on the number of pennies that are available. All right, it should only end when my number is less than or equal to the number of pennies. All right, hopefully that makes sense there. Okay, so once that's all said and done, once we've gotten our number, we do need to now check. So we're going to check if it was the last number or the last penny. If it was the last penny, what are we going to do? Change feedback to say computer lost. We will adjust number of pennies and then display our pennies. Or lack thereof pennies. And then finally return, because if that was the last penny, then the computer is done. Nothing else needs to happen. End the computer's turn. However, if it wasn't the last penny, then we're pretty much doing the same thing up here. Is we're adjusting the number of pennies left, we're providing feedback to the user, and we are displaying pennies again, just like we did before. So again, these are very similar methods to each other, but how they're accomplished is slightly different. So they are going to have some variations in the code, at least in this initial part here, and this initial part here. So that's the computer's turn. And then down here on this reset function, what are we trying to accomplish here? Well, when I say reset, when I click the reset button, and the reset button is right down here, line 16 on the HTML, I have this reset function. When I press the reset button, what do I want to happen? Well, I want the game to completely go back to normal. So what does that mean? Well, number of pennies is reset. Show the pennies again, because who knows how many are being displayed right now. Show number of pennies. And then just give the user feedback. All right, give the user feedback, let them know the game is reset. That's what we're doing here. This is what you're trying to do to make this work. Again, if you're able to get to this point, you've pretty much accomplished what I want you to be able to do with this project. You do still need to add in some additional features to make the game a little bit unique to yourself. I'll give you some flexibility on that, on kind of what you want to do, what you can do. But this is what I want you to kind of get to happen here, is make this work. And again, I'll show you one more time what it's going to look like when it's all said and done. Waiting for my computer to load up here. There we go. So once your program is running, it's going to look like this.